Hi guys, it's Meteorologist Alexandra Cranford coming to you from my kitchen, and today we are doing another baking show and we're talking about the science behind something that I like to bake and that I hope you're interested in baking too. And in this case, it is an enriched bread or an enriched dough bread. So I'm really excited about this. I've already made something similar, which I'll show you in just a second, but this is kind of a panettone style of bread, also kind of like a brioche bread. So if you do like baking, if you're interested in making something for Easter that's kind of light, maybe you could have it for an Easter brunch, you could have it later in the afternoon, maybe after Easter dinner. This would be something fun to try. Last week with baking and science, with our weather lesson last week, we talked about a very simple bread. And if you were with me, we just had a few ingredients. We tossed the flour with some yeast and salt in a bowl, and that was almost it. We had some water and we baked up this very basic, but I think pretty delicious peasant bread. This is a different story today. What we're going to be making, again, is a panettone style kind of dessert bread. So if you've ever had a king cake, of course there are a lot of brioche king cakes. This is a very similar sort of dough to that, but it does involve kind of like the classic Italian cake for Easter or Christmas, dried fruit, and it also includes almonds. So it has all of these things in it. And an enriched dough is something that has butter, milk, and eggs. And the idea is that it has a lot more fat and a lot more protein. So it's kind of like a special sort of bread. And when you see the amount of butter that goes into this, you may be shocked. I was pretty shocked. So here is what we'll do. I will show you the ingredients and then we will get into making the dough. And if you can see it, I think, can you see it? Let me adjust the dough here that I've been mixing. So a little difficult to kind of time everything, but I do think that you guys will get the idea because we're going to kind of finish this dough and then you do have to leave it overnight in the refrigerator. So this is kind of one of those lengthy sort of bakes, but it does yield something pretty good and special. And if you're a student joining me for this weather lesson, we're going to talk a little bit about the science, and then also we will get into the process of making this kind of thing. So here are the ingredients, and don't worry, I will post a similar recipe afterwards so you can print it out or pull it up on your phone or whatever and have very easy access to that. So this is not the only way you'll find these ingredients. But the idea is, first of all, bread flour. I actually ran out of bread flour, and like all of us, we're running out of everything these days, and grocery stores not always carrying it. So I had to use all-purpose flour actually, so you could do that if you want. A little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, instant yeast like we've talked about, I showed you last week. Hopefully you have a bit of that because again, I've heard that that's kind of hard to find in stores too. Some warm milk and some eggs and some butter. A lot of butter actually. So we're going to be putting all of these in, and then after we put all of this into our dough, we will be adding in these things. So these will be the things that we add, and this is rough. You don't have to do exactly this, but the idea would be about 5 ounces of raisins, about 5 of currants or dried cranberries, and then I put in 5 ounces of dried cherries, and then almost that much of whole almonds. If you want to change these up though a little bit, maybe have chopped up maybe dried apricots or something like that, you could easily sub that in. So this is just kind of the idea that I'm going with. But again, if you don't have every single one of these ingredients, no big deal. So what we are doing is talking about the enriched dough, and the enriched dough, again, with so much milk and so much butter and with the eggs, it kind of changes the dough, the kind of makeup of the dough. So there's a lot more, obviously, fat, and then there's also more protein from all of these different things. So that changes how we would knead. Remember last week we barely kneaded that bread that we made on Thursday, but for this one we are going to knead it, and we're going to do that kind of in 2 different phases because the butter makes it difficult for those strands of gluten to form up and elongate. So we're going to, first of all, put these things in, the bread flour. Again, I told you guys that I had to use all-purpose flour because I ran out of my bread flour, which would have a higher protein content and would make it easier for those gluten strands and to develop and elongate and kind of give it a more bread-like sort of texture. We have a little bit of salt, so I would put that in a bowl, a big bowl, and actually I'm going to use this in just a second. it's dirty, so we'll be putting the dough back into it. But if you're just starting, put in your bowl flour, the salt, the bit of sugar that I showed you, and your bit of instant yeast. And then you will also put in something that I forgot to take out of my refrigerator just yet, but you will put in the 5 eggs, and you'll also put in the milk, and you can warm the milk up slightly, not to boiling or anything, but just pop it into your microwave just for a little while, warm it up, don't use it cold like I have it, and then your 5 eggs that you can just kind of loosely kind of scramble, or just kind of whip a little bit and then put into your bowl. So after you get all of those things into your bowl, you would mix this up. So if you have a mixer, you could easily do that with a dough hook. But if you guys were with me last week, you know that I don't use a mixer hardly ever because I really like to touch the dough and weirdly like get my hands in it and stuff. So I just mixed it all together, and I needed that mixture, and I'm sorry I'm ahead of you guys because the next steps I wanted to show you especially, I needed that without the butter for about 7 minutes. So that's what I did, just a kind of rough knead. Then I added the butter, and you guys, we're talking about a lot of butter, a little over 2 sticks of butter, or of 18 tablespoons. So if you know about brioche bread and king cakes and everything, you know that there's a lot of butter involved. And so there is definitely lots of butter involved. So we added the butter, and then I kneaded it again for about 7 minutes. And now I'm at the point where I have this kind of dough. Can you see this? It's kind of stretchy. It's very, very soft. And it's really fun to kind of just get your hands in a little bit. It reminds me of Play-Doh. That's why I think baking is so much fun for kids, because it is a lot of fun to kind of get your hands involved, and then you get to eat the results. So much fun. And of course there's science involved. So when we get the butter in, finally, that doesn't prevent any longer. We kind of let the gluten develop a bit with the first knead. Then we added the butter. And all of these things, by the way, contribute to browning. So the butter actually, remember last week we talked about the air bubbles that form with the yeast and the sugar production, the fermentation that produces CO2 little bubbles. So in this case, with so much butter in the dough, the butter kind of surrounds those bubbles that do form, and it creates these big air pockets in panettone breads or brioche breads. That's why they have those big pockets and kind of holes in the bread that you can see. A traditional panettone also rises up really tall and beautiful, you may know, because it's baked traditionally in a big tall pan. I don't have one of those fancy pans, so I did mine in a different kind of pan, and it kind of came out as a more sort of just yummy sort of brioche type bread sort of looking thing, so not the classic look. But anyway, very soft dough, and sometimes I get a knife and I kind of scrape it on the counter because you want to make sure that you have all of it kind of incorporated and you're not leaving any pieces of the flour out. But now is the fun part where we're going to add the add-ins. So I have, again, as I showed you, in this bowl I have dried cherries, which are going to go in. I also have dried cranberries, and this is kind of a lot of stuff going in. I also have raisins. You could use golden raisins, and again, as I mentioned, if you don't have any of these particular ingredients, you could kind of just really even leave it out if you wanted to, or you could just kind of use something different. And then I have raw whole almonds. So it's a lot. There's so much good stuff in here. It's kind of ridiculous. I'm really excited about it. But you just kind of begin to knead that in and kind of gently work it in and mix it in. So again, this is really fun to me to kind of get my hands in, and I'm keeping one free because I'm going to have to press the button on my phone pretty soon. But you would just kind of work this in. So a lot of fun. You don't need at this step, since we already kneaded it twice, you don't need to do it for that long. We're not really trying to super incorporate most of the ingredients aside from the add-ins that we have just put in. So again, cherries, raisins, cranberries, and almonds all sound pretty good to me. I hope you might like that too. And that's why, to me, this could be kind of like a breakfast type thing, a really nice sort of rich breakfast, maybe with some fruits And it could also be maybe for after dinner, maybe with some coffee, and again, a really nice kind of thing, kind of special to have a freshly baked thing for Easter. So, okay, I have it all worked through, and again, I'm going to kind of scrape some of this off my counter. I remember the first time I did this on the counter, it was kind of shocking to me, and I was like, you can do that? I thought you needed to mix things in a bowl with a mixer. And it's like, nope, you can just mix things on a clean counter, and it works just as well. So now that I have the dough kind of all put together, and it looks really good, everything's pretty evenly incorporated in there with all of the delicious add-ins, I will pop that back into the bowl that I started my ingredients with, which is why it's a little bit dirty. But you can see it's just kind of this beautiful ball of soft brioche-style dough, and I will put it back in the bowl. So let me scrape all of this off, because what a shame to waste any of that very buttery dough. And I will put it in, and this is where it gets easier. So from here, you would just cover this with some plastic wrap, which I will pull out of here, and you would refrigerate this for overnight. So for several hours, or if you can, leave it overnight, and you would just put it into your freezer with the, into your refrigerator with a little plastic wrap on it, and you will see it expand. So it's always fun for me to look in there and kind of peek in when I'm getting something else and see it growing. So I would leave that in overnight, and I don't have another dough to show you guys, but I do have the finished product, which I'll show you in a second. But I wanted to give you a couple of the last directions. The following day, so tomorrow in the morning, you would take out your dough, and by that point for me, it was really hard. All the butter has kind of begun to harden, and it's a little bit bigger. You would shape it into a ball, and then after really, really well buttering or generously buttering a dish, in my case I use this kind of pan, but if you have one of those gorgeous tall Panettone tins, by all means use that. You would put it in a ball and just kind of leave it in this tin for another maybe 2 to 3 or so hours. I left mine for like 3.5 hours just on the countertop. And I just left it there. And then after waiting for that time for it to kind of rise a little bit again, and it won't be as dramatic as that bread we baked last week because there's so much more ingredients since this is an enriched dough, you would eventually, after maybe 3 or so hours, brush a little bit of egg on top, and then you would bake it for 25 minutes at 350 degrees. Then bring the temperature down to 300 degrees and bake it for roughly 30-35 minutes more. So, as you may know, with enriched breads, it has all of this very protein and fatty kind of stuff in it. It has egg yolks, it has egg whites, it has milk, and it has all that butter. So all of these things, along with the sugar, brown more quickly. So you may notice that it's browning pretty fast in your oven. I definitely noticed that, and I just put a little thing of aluminum foil on top, and I just kind of just popped it over the tin in the oven as soon as I saw that it was dark enough, and I just left it there for the remainder of the baking time. So if you take it out when it's just starting to look really brown and golden and done, it will not be finished baking on the inside because the sugar and all of the fat and so forth on the outside is already browning more than it's baking inside. So that's the general idea for this Panettone style bread, Easter bread, and here's the one that I baked yesterday, and it came out like this. So you can see the kind of shine on it. That's from that little bit of egg wash that I put on. You can see the different add-ins that we put in. You can see the cherries, the cranberries, the almonds, and you can see also the raisins. And of course, you know that this is full of good stuff. And you just saw so much butter, almost no way that this could taste bad. So let me cut into it and give you an idea what it looks like inside. And again, this one is not quite as holy as many of these Panettone style brioche breads get because again, I didn't have bread flour. I used all-purpose flour, but clearly it came out pretty okay. So, oh, that was good. I got an almond in there along with a big cherry and a raisin. For those of you in New Orleans, of course, it's going to remind you a lot of like a king cake because it's pretty much that brioche style bread. Really good, very rich. It has all of those good enriched ingredients for an enriched dough. And again, I think it would be good for you, hopefully for you and maybe your family and friends or whoever your little close Easter circle is this weekend or Passover circle tonight, for you to share with them. So thank you guys so much for joining me. We talked a bit about the science of enriched breads versus other kinds of breads. We talked about the fats, we talked about the proteins, and about the moisture kind of incorporated from the eggs and so forth. Next week, we're going to continue. My bite was too big, wasn't it? We're going to continue with more weather lessons, so I hope you guys can join me starting on Monday at 1 p.m. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and happy Easter, and thanks again for joining me. So I'll see you next week for more weather lessons here on WWL-TV Facebook Live. Also, by the way, if you missed it, here were the ingredients for the dough. Here were the add-in suggestions, and I will post after this on my Facebook page, Alexandra Cranford. I will post a link to a very similar recipe so you can have everything ready to go and very easily accessible there. So thank you guys so much. Have a good rest of your day and have a wonderful weekend. Bye.